Go.
So as we were saying, the first temple, so the Talmud relates to us, was destroyed by virtue of the fact that the Jewish people sinned grievously before Hashem. These are all cardinal sins of the Torah, and the prophets and Nevi'im came time and again and warned the people this is what's going to happen. We know the story. It didn't work, they didn't listen, and they were sent into exile. That we know. However, ask Chazal, what about the second Mikdash? The second commonwealth of the Jewish people? The second attempt to actually do what the Jewish people are supposed to do, which is something we'll speak about in a moment. The second attempt did not involve these problems. We know from the early period of the second temple period, which is described in the Tanakh, and we know from Chazal, it also happens to be Masechet Yomah, but elsewhere, that the Jewish people were weaned off Avodah Zarah. The Jewish people no longer worshipping Avodah Zarah. And we're also not aware of any pervasive or very obvious problems of the type that we discussed a moment ago. We don't hear about these issues. So if everything's so good, why is everything so bad? Why did things not work out as we were like? Why did the Jewish Commonwealth, the second Jewish Commonwealth, collapse eventually? And why was the Mikdash destroyed? What went wrong? The answer which Chazal give, which is often repeated and spoken of, is two words: Sinath Hinam, which means needless hatred, baseless hatred. And that's actually a very, very profound answer if you understand what Chazal are driving at, because I feel that many people do not understand what Chazal are driving at when they say this. Many people understand this in a very simplistic, I would say even childish manner. They understand from this that because the Jews weren't nice to each other, they didn't say good morning to their neighbors, and maybe they spoke a little bit of Lashon Hara, which we know is asur, but everyone does anyhow. And they made, someone was insulted and whatever, he didn't apologize, and people didn't like each other and what have you. That's called Sinath Hinam. That's why the whole endeavor collapsed. And this is definitely how many people understand it. I can tell you from my own neighborhood in Yerushalayim, every year before Tisha B'Av, the posters go up all over the neighborhood that this is the period of the mourning for the destruction of the Mikdash, and we know that the Mikdash was destroyed because of Sinath Hinam, which they, in their minds, translate equals Lashon Hara and the like. And therefore, we have to be extra diligent this time to learn Hilchot Lashon Hara from the Chafetz Chaim, and they tell you about classes and talks and seminars and etc. Now, I'm all for not speaking Lashon Hara. Don't misunderstand. But I don't believe that it's because of Lashon Hara the Mikdash or the Second Commonwealth were destroyed. That's not what I believe, and I don't think that's what Chazal believe. In order to understand what Chazal meant when they said Sinath Hinam, we have to take that same Gemara, Yomad Daf Tet Amud Bet, and go down the page towards about 2/3 of the way down. Because there we find another piece of information, which is essential to understand this matter. There it is related that the famous Amora, the famous Jewish Chacham, rabbi, called Rabbi Bar Hayim, who was from Bavel, from Babylon, who frequently came to Eretz Yisrael to study Torah, and then he would return and transmit what he had learned and return again. He was walking along the banks of the Jordan River. And he saw in the water another great Chacham, another Amora from Eretz Yisrael, not from Bavel, by the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Resh Lakish. And he saw that Resh Lakish was swimming in the water, but now he wanted to get out of the water, so he offered him his hand to help pull him up. Must have been a slippery bank or something. And instead of thanking him for his arm and for his hand and coming up, he said, "No, thank you. I don't want your hand." And he added and explained, just like he said to Rabbi Bar Hayim, he said in Aramaic, "Elaha sanin anacho," which means, took an oath in the name of Hashem, by God's name, I hate you people. Well, what's going on here? One chacham, one rabbi says to another rabbi, I hate you people. Which people? Why do you hate him? What happened? What's going on? But this is what the Gemara relates. And it goes on to explain. The Resh Lakish said to Rabbi Bar Hayim, the reason we are in our present situation, and keep in mind, we're talking about a period about 130, 40, 50 years after the destruction of the Mikdash, the second Mikdash, and the Jewish people are living under the heavy yoke of Rome in their own land, living under Roman occupation. And this is also well after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which were followed by terrible persecutions, etc. So the Jews were having a rough time. And Resh Lakish was someone who felt this very keenly. And he said, it's because of you people, in other words, you Jews from Bavel, who didn't come at the time of Ezra when you could have come to Eretz Yisrael, it's because of you people that we're in the things happened and turned out this way. Now you have to keep in mind two things. First of all, that this conversation is taking place 7 centuries after the event. Ezra Sofer was approximately 7 centuries or something like that before this conversation is happening. So this is a man who bears a grudge. He doesn't forget very quickly. He still has something against these Jews who stayed in Chutz La'aretz, stayed in Bavel. Don't come and help us out here. You do your own thing. That's wonderful. And now look what happened. He's angry. He's very angry. What he's saying, Resh Lakish, is we live in the real world. The causes for things are very real. You don't have to search for some esoteric or mystical reason why things occur. The reason's right there before you. We were small, we were few in number, we were a small nation, not strong enough to stand up to these different empires and nations that came along, and that's why we were unsuccessful. That is Resh Lakish's take, at least, on that period of Jewish history. And essentially he's talking about the entire period of the second time. By the way, this is not, as it might occur to someone perhaps, this is not just the private position of Resh Lakish. This same position is expressed in the Midrash, in Shir HaShirim Rabbah. I think it's Parashah Heth. There it's related that a certain Jew came from Bavel and moved. He came to live in Eretz Yisrael apparently, these things did happen, and a merchant in the shuk, in the marketplace, also made some derogatory comments about his country of origin, the Jews there, also along the same lines as Resh Lakish. And he said to himself, who is this person? Why is he saying that? He's a nut. He's crazy. And then he happened to walk into the Beit Midrash, and he heard Rabbi Shelah, a great Chacham in Eretz Yisrael, say exactly the same thing. So then he said, now I understand that what he said to that merchant, I thought it was Stam and Amaretz talking shtuyot, talking narishkeit. But now I see what he's saying is true. So if Rabbi Shelah thought so, Resh Lakish thought so, and that merchant thought so, so apparently there's something to it. And Chazal do record this. So this is something we're supposed to take note of. So, taking this piece of information and reminding ourselves again of what we said earlier, that Chazal, on the same page, the same Gemara, Yomad Daf Tet, say that the second Mikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Hinam. Shabtai Ben Dov explains that Sinat Hinam has to be understood in the following manner. When you have a nation that is faced with a great task, a great challenge, and they fall short, they're not able to meet that challenge. As you say here in America, they didn't step up to the plate. Not in sufficient numbers, not with sufficient enthusiasm, and not with sufficient vision. That's the operative word, vision. Did the Jewish people have the vision? Did they have leaders with vision, or perhaps they had the leadership of the people weren't receiving. You know, you have a radio station can transmit, but you have to have a receiver. You have to turn it on and get and tune your dial onto that station. If you don't pick up the signal, it might as well not be there. So I'm not blaming anyone in particular. I don't know whom to blame. We know that the malaise is a national malaise. That's what Shabtai Ben Dov explains. The Jewish people were suffering from a national malaise. Lack of vision, lack of motivation. They were unsure of themselves. They didn't believe they had it within them to return en masse and create that which the Torah decrees and mandates is the destiny and the purpose of the Jewish people. And we'll talk about that purpose shortly. But before we do, we have to explain still what sinat hinam means. What does that really mean? When you have a situation which requires great leadership and great vision and great deeds, and it's obvious that it's not happening. You know, the people are just not up to it, and they're tired, or they haven't even tried yet. They're maybe not tired, but they don't believe they can do it. So nothing happens, or not enough happens. Then people become despondent, and people become cynical. And then the next thing that happens is something with which we are all familiar, and that's something called politics. What does that have to do with politics? I'll tell you what it has to do with politics. Human affairs are either run by people with vision, who have great ideas and goals in mind, and know how to motivate people to move in that direction. Or it's run by what we call today, unfortunately, it doesn't always have to be that way. There are also great politicians. Winston Churchill was a politician, but he was a great man. He saved Great Britain from total disaster. For years, he told people what was about to happen. No one wanted to listen. But when push came to shove, they turned to him and said, right, you be Prime Minister now, you dig us out of this mess. And he did. He was a great man, but that's unusual, unfortunately, in modern day politics. Most politicians, well, you don't need me to tell you about most of the politicians. You all live in America. I've been here for a few weeks now. I've been listening to the radio. I've seen, a few minutes of the news here and there. You have caucuses and primaries and this interview and that politician, and we all know how shallow and how empty and how meaningless it all is. So when there's no great vision, no great ideas, it all comes down to the kind of politics of which we're all familiar. That's exactly what happened to the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. You shouldn't think otherwise. It's not just Israeli politics today that are messy. It was messy way back then as well. Then also you had political parties, you had groups. They weren't called, they didn't use the word miflaga, party, but that's what they were. Many people think that the Perushim and the Tzadukim and other groups in the nation at that time were religious sects, and their differences were mainly of a religious nature. But that's not so. And that was only part of the picture. The real story was about power. It was about who would run the country, who would be in charge, who would be able to grow fat of tax revenue and all these sorts of things. The Jewish people at that time fell into this kind of directionless and very unedifying sort of existence, where different groups, or in modern parlance, different parties, were vying for power and control over the little pond. Now, what happens when you have political parties and groups and factions within a nation or a community? You immediately get sinat hinam. We know that. If you're a Republican, that guy over there is obviously an idiot and everything he's saying is wrong. Why? Because he's a Democrat, right? He has to be wrong because he belongs to the wrong group, to the wrong party. You're lucky you only have two parties here. Where I come from, we have about, I don't recall, I think 30-something ran for the Knesset, and I think 13 or 14 got in.